Hello and welcome to the Smooth Scaling podcast, where we speak with industry experts to uncover how to design, build and run scalable and resilient systems. I'm your host, Jose Quaresma, and today we had the pleasure of chatting to Klaus Koefoed, who's the CEO of T-Systems in Northern Europe. We had a great conversation with Klaus about sovereign cloud, the current state of the cloud industry in Europe, what is still holding it back, and how far it has progressed in the last few years. We also dived into the new challenges that AI and LLMs bring to infrastructure choices and how T-Systems with the Open Telecom Cloud is investing in that area. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. Enjoy! Welcome, Klaus. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Jose.
And I would like us to start straight in and maybe a little bit with your background, right? So you spent more than 20 years in consulting in Capgemini and Deloitte and Accenture. And would like to hear a little bit about what made you make the move from the consulting world to the operational side with T-Systems.
That's a good question. I think I saw a very interesting opportunity outside. You could say our region. We work in the Nordics, or I work in the Nordics and UK. But in the home market, we're sort of the big animal on the savannah. We're not here, but the solutions we have are extremely relevant also for our market in Denmark and abroad. So I thought this journey of making that much more visible to the market and being something else than what we might have been known for in the past was a cool challenge.
At that time when you made that move, was there a sovereignty, were you hearing that from client conversations?
No, not really. No, it was more of the usual topics around security. Of course, they are part of almost any conversation, but sovereignty as a theme, no, not really.
So, and when did that explode?
Yeah, it exploded around January 25, I would say. For us, it started really when with the Ukraine war, when the access to satellites was turned off for a while for Ukraine. We thought and discussed internally, so what if you sort of extrapolate that scenario onto other technologies, like public cloud, like other themes, what will the impact then be? And then we started talking to clients about that risk scenario, really, which it is, right? What if that, and in the beginning I was like, not so much. I mean, people had noticed, but that was about it. Then the International Criminal Court happened where, some of the judges were and still are treated like, sanctioned by the US. So didn't have access to office and other things. And then it started gaining momentum from there.
So the risk has been there for a while, but I guess it was made more real in the last couple of years.
I think the examples start adding up, and then the need to maybe have another round at looking at the what if scenarios. What if whatever crazy scenario you can think of, if that happens, then what do we do? How do we ensure we can run our business? And then you can say, of course, the more off the wall the scenario is, maybe the likelihood of it happening is lower. Yeah. Whereas other scenarios will be much more realistic, probably.
And I think you've been thinking a lot and writing as well, and it's kind of how does Europe stand in this setup, right? So can you share a little bit of what you see are the main maybe strengths but also challenges within the cloud and resilience?
So I think, first of all, we as Europe have put our money elsewhere than in Europe for a long, long time. And I think it has made sense. You have some hyperscalers out there who are bringing value every day to their clients. Now we just have an additional dimension to focus on. So as we've talked about before, it's for us, it's not an either or. It's both and. Using what you already use for the right purposes, and then think this risk element into what you put where and why. And for Europe, I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to to maybe get a better balance of where you make your investments and put some of those investments into Europe. So we have, we have a strong tech tradition anyway, and good innovative mind. So of course we can do it. Question is, of course, where do we put the money then? Yeah.
And what would you see are the top three challenges that Europe is facing right now?
So I think there's sort of a private and public sector challenge. One is, how big is the problem really? Mm. And I think that's a healthy discussion to have, because if you are to invest in something, the outcome or the risk mitigation has to make sense, right? That you put your money where you can see there's a relevant return, and then in public sector, there's also an element of making sure that the requirements you put up are not necessarily only the usual requirements, which will then, and that goes for private sector also, that is not pre-tailored for the known past outcomes, if you will, or answers, but that you think in a slightly different way. And there's a lot of push, I think, if you read the press, to put in criteria around, scoring mechanisms for when something is European. Mm-hmm. And it's, of course, finding a good balance. So I think for private sector, it's also a matter of, if you think this is important, well, then you also have to act in that way, right? So you have to make your selection criteria to at least address the theme of European platforms, as an example.
What I hear is a pretty kind of, you're advising us to take everyone a pretty, I think, balanced approach on kind of don't as you said, it's not either or, but have a thoughtful kind of engage with those ideas and make sure that you understand what the consequences are of doing it or not doing it, and taking it from there, right?
Absolutely. I think there's no, let's not be lemmings and just run in a certain direction because everybody else does it. I would advise anyone to maybe take a step back. I think there's some learnings from the first waves of cloud where everybody were excited. There were good incentives, etc. So maybe in hindsight, too much was sort of shoveled on a cloud. Mm. And then, of course, you have other companies like yourself who've built cloud native, which is different. And there are some learnings out of that. Now it's about taking a step back and say, okay, what is my real need across my business and my application portfolio? We as a company, T-Systems and Deutsche Telekom, we have so much legacy and so much, mention and technology, we probably have it, right? So we are on the exact same journey, moving from old to new with a different lens on what we place where. So we have a mix of, American hyperscalers, our own European cloud platform, private cloud, and other platforms. So shifting the balance between those different platforms.
What would you say is the ideal scenario for a company that is a SaaS company out there right now? Do I hear you saying it's more about being able to play or to be in whatever cloud makes sense? Is that a fair assumption, or how would you frame kind of the perfect situation right now for a SaaS company?
So now you'll get the ex-consultant answer,
yes,
right? The answer depends on the company you're seeking the answer for. Because if you're a big telco like us, it might be manageable to actually be on several clouds and private cloud, etc. For a cloud native company, more of a startup, you really have to think hard about, I am where I am for a good reason. Why do I want to dip my toe in platform number 2 or 3? That must be because either the market simply demands it, or the risk profile of, there's a lot of talk about kill switches, right? If that happens, then what does that mean to my business? So you have to look at, I would say, per company, what the right answer is. And we all know that every time you add a new technology, you have to have, your people have to learn it. Mm-hmm. And you have to manage that additional complexity. So, it's about finding the right balance, again, depending on who you are.
So I do see it. Let's say that there's a startup just starting to develop their system right now, right? I think it feels like it's quite an interesting thing to think about and a discussion to have, because of course if you don't want to overcomplicate from the beginning, because you're still probably trying for market fit and trying to understand if what you're building makes sense. But on the other hand, if you would start it with at least a multi-cloud perspective in mind, then it would be easier at some point later if you want to have that option. So have you seen that balance out there recently?
I think the concept of optionality is really something you need to think about from the beginning. Because if you go all in cloud native, obviously that gives you loads of benefits, but it comes at a price, right? Because that gives you less freedom of movement. And if freedom of movement is important for whatever reason, then maybe you have to think a little bit differently.
And would you say? But are there any? Can you think of any case right now where freedom of movement is not important right now? Because with this current context, I feel like it is. It would always be important.
It is important, and we've seen smaller SaaS companies that went ex hyperscaler native from the beginning, where that was obviously a quality sign when they were out in the market, and still is, of course. But then you go to certain markets where actually, that's American. We're not sure we like that. But if you come back when you're on something European, then we'll talk again. Yeah. And that has changed quite quickly, I would say.
I can see that.
Yeah, and that of course means that you have to think about how do we not just make our life incredibly more complex by being on two or more different platforms, but think your architecture through in a good way.
Yeah. That makes sense. And you mentioned previously the kind of thinking about these what if scenarios, right? And in your experience, when I guess it's probably the CIO usually the first one thinking about these what if scenarios, is there anything that has surprised them when they start thinking about, okay, what if we lose access to this hyperscaler? Has there been any kind of findings or things that has been unexpected, do you think?
So for us, it's we have those kind of conversations. I would say if you want to do it properly, you either need to do it with your own risk team or find an external advisor to help you work that through properly. I would say often it's you run into, well, will that ever happen? No, but let's park that, because that's now we're just walking through what could some of the scenarios be, and it's about resilience at the end of the day. How do you make sure that you can run your business even if you don't have access for days or longer, right?
And so it's that aspect of there's the likelihood or the probability of it happening. That's one aspect of it, and those are, I think, probably in some of these what if scenarios have been going up and up, but the impact of it happening, that's
exactly. And that's normal risk analysis, right? And some of those that were off the wall scenarios before 25 might not be as crazy as we thought back then. And then of course the impact can be high. Lack of access to your core business systems or data or IP, etc., etc.
And when talking about sovereignty, you usually talk about kind of it at three levels, right? Is data, when we get it's straight data, operational, and technology, right?
And then you can say legal framework on top of that, right? Yeah.
Can you tell us kind of how should leaders think about those three levels and figure out which one do they need? Can you tell us?
Well, I think at some level you have to think about all of them, and then I would say, and then of course there's an element of a journey, in the sense that if you take our public cloud or any hardware out there today, it's either Asian or American. We are behind in Europe really building. We'll get there, but right, in this moment of time, it's sort of either one or the other, right? And then, of course, on top of that, there is a rest of the stack. Is it open source? Is it something else? And where's your data sitting? Is it in Europe? Does it stay in Europe? Is it when you have sort of peak hours on a cloud? Does it suddenly shift to do stuff outside Europe or not? That's quite important to know. Then, of course, who is it that operates your platform? Is that, again, stays within Europe or not? Yeah. And then you would say the legal framework or things like Cloud Act. If you somewhere end up being an American company, then that applies, full stop. It does not apply to us as a European company, right? So no one can force us to give anybody your data. And then again, as a journey, you can pick solutions today that will give you functionality that is very close to what you see from the American hyperscalers. So you can get very far, very quickly, very easily, actually, in terms of moving from A to B. Have the market, broadly speaking, in Europe solved, that it runs on a European box? No, not yet. But it's a strong step forward already now that's available.
And maybe just before we go into kind of some more of the AI side of it that I would like to touch upon as well, would like to talk about from a, let's say that someone is starting to look at this seriously, and they actually want to look into the options that are available in Europe, right? What would you suggest for the main evaluation criteria, right? So what should people be thinking about when looking at the possibilities out there?
So we have spent quite a bit of time since January, February last year talking to clients about. We have one slide showing that where we have two dimensions. You have functionality on the y-axis, and then you have sovereignty on the x-axis, right? We as a company, we serve clients from anything hyperscaler to sort of a bare metal servers, right? And in that continuum, you have to find out with yourself. So, if I have something where I want to leverage AWS, full speed, that's fine. But over here, it may be so secret that I'll give up any kind of functionality. I'll come with that more or less myself. I just need super secure platform, right? So that's the starting point. What is the need you have, either very granular or as a you would say more holistic view, and then there are several European options out there. So it's really, are you looking more for sort of you could say sovereign servers, if you want to call it that, or do you want something that is much more like what you're used to? Yeah. And then there are different players across these different solutions.
But it does start from knowing and specifying what you need and what you want, right?
You have to understand your own need and your own situation first. That's the best place to start, because otherwise, how do you know what you're looking for?
Yeah.
And then I would say there's a lot of noise out there. There are loud voices. There's a lot that is being labeled cloud.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and we've even several clients do that, they start with maybe 15, 18 European clouds. And then they have defined their own criteria for what they're looking for and their needs. And then they work their way through, and then they end up with 2-3 answers. And then they do proof of concepts on those and then decide based on that. Not everybody can do that. But I think my point is, at macro level, you can call something cloud, but then if you start looking at either bottom up, what are the services available? What are the security that is there? What are the, managed services, service levels, security certifications, etc.? Then suddenly you begin to see some of the differences of the possible answers out there. Yeah. So it's not less complex, unfortunately, for clients.
No. Yeah. But that's, again, back to kind of that it's not coming for free, and part of it is also the complexity, and of course discussing and setting something up to be able to run in several clouds will inevitably have to be more complex, right? But then it's I don't know if inevitably is the right word, but most likely will be more complex, right?
Yeah, and then of course, if you're a sizable organization, typically you will have an orchestration layer saying, based on these criteria, this thing lands over here, or we're building services for clients over here based on AWS or based on our platform or based on a third thing.
Yeah, and I think to be fair, some of the bigger companies out there have been doing that anyways at some level, right? And maybe before everything was in their data centers, and they're starting to look at cloud and the public cloud providers. Now it's kind of, I guess it's continuing that spectrum of possibilities, just adding some of the more nuanced discussions around Europe or not Europe, right?
Yeah, and I think like the recommendation is have a look at your insurance at home every year, right? Go through, am I insured the right way? I think you need to do that also as an organization around cloud and platforms in totality to say, given we are where we are today and the world as it looks right now, do we need to fine tune? We probably need to look at it more often than that, but
1 year.
But at least you need to look at it.
1 year these days is very long.
It is very long, but it's more of having the discipline to say we need to look at this on a recurring basis and not something is triggered from outside events, but that you have it as a discipline.
Yeah. And you mentioned that some of the organizations have this orchestration layer that I think that helps them kind of navigate, I guess, simply put, where to put the applications and where. So how do you? Are you thinking about a concrete layer, kind of a piece of software or a system, or is it more of just a decision diagram or a bit of both?
I would say it's a bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it needs to be technology supported, but that you have predefined, okay, if it's this type of data, for instance, then the right home for that is over here.
Yeah.
Or if we need to build the latest cool thing, facing customers, then we typically leverage this hyperscaler for that, for these reasons. That you have thought that through, and then it's orchestrated sort of in the background for the business.
Yeah. That makes sense, and I also back in my consulting years, I did work quite a bit with Red Hat and with OpenShift, and I've lost a bit track of the work that they've been doing the last couple of years. But I think that there was a lot of it was that orchestration layer that was already being discussed at that level, right? That, well, you develop something and then you can decide where do you want to put it, right?
And one thing is, of course, geopolitics and all that, but there's also an element of freedom of movement. If you have that, then if you're over here today and prices evolve in a way you don't like, well, then at least if you have set yourself up to have that capability to move, you can decide to move, or you can use that as a negotiation factor into.
It's a little. You mentioned the insurance. You used insurance as a metaphor, and here I also feel like it's a bit the same paradigm, right? So you're paying. So you might be paying the cost upfront of having that possibility, but then you might use it or not, right? So I guess that's the parallel is also there. Yeah. And we talked about kind of hybrid cloud, but is there? Do you see a difference between how your customers use hybrid cloud and multi-cloud? So does it make a difference in the work that you do? Or how do you see the difference between the two?
Yeah, good question. I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think there has been, especially in our region where we're sitting in Copenhagen today and Denmark, there's been a lot of appetite for public cloud, right? In the Nordics in general, I would say. I think now we sort of see a wave 2. You could say the learnings are there from X number of years on hyperscalers and commercially, also how much do I actually leverage the platform services versus more using it in some areas as infrastructure as a service. And I think that also helps fuel the considerations about, so in my next wave, what is then the right answer for me? I don't know if that really answers your question, but
yeah, it does. It does. Thanks. So I think that's it is again back to kind of thinking about the risks and what you want to achieve, and having a, I think, overall tough discussion and tough considerations about that, right? And figuring out where to go from there. Yeah. It's maybe it sounds simple when I say it like that, but it is, I think, very hard to do.
But on the other hand, if you think it through well with what you know today, and then execute based on that, and then of course it shouldn't be that today we go left and in 3 months we go right. Yeah. You probably need to think a little further than that, so you don't drive complexity and cost through the roof. But I think in this wave 2 or 3, whatever it is for organizations, there's a time to reflect and take some of those learnings of being on cloud and say, okay. I mean, for us, again, T-Systems and Deutsche Telekom, we've been on a journey where we put things on public cloud, and in some areas you leverage it to the fullest extent. And also you learn that, okay, but actually this application is just humming away quietly, and we're not really leveraging, the platform services. So why is it running there? Is it commercially viable to just stay? Mm-hmm. Or would it make more sense to move it to a private cloud platform? And had you said that, I think 2 years ago, I would probably be called old school, but actually we see that in several clients that putting your pieces of the puzzle together in a slightly different way going forward, and private cloud seems to be a hot thing as well.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot of our discussion has been around the risks, but there's also some cost perspective as well that I think has been a bit more discussed in the last years, of actually going kind of a bit back from public cloud into data center or private cloud, if depending on how your application is used, right? If it's is it for example a lot of very variable workloads, then I think public probably has big advantages there. But as you said, if it's humming around kind of along there, and then there's probably something to save by having it in private cloud, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there could be, and also as I said, if you really need all the services that are there, then public cloud is the right answer. Whereas if you don't really, then maybe it's not. No. And I think that's exciting. Yes. All these outside impacts that come, plus running your own business and looking after it. What is the cost of having this thing running to serve our clients, and can we optimize some things across that whole ecosystem? And of course you can.
And I would actually like to jump a little bit over to AI and sovereign AI. I think we couldn't have an episode these days about talking about AI, right? So can you share with us, how do you see the European alternatives to AI? How do you see them measuring up with the American ones, and where do you see the main gaps?
So I think the AI initiatives are obviously today built on American technology. That's just where we are today, right? So again, that will be a journey in terms of start producing something European on the hardware side. On the other hand, you could say as Europeans, we're quite good at being innovative. Yeah. And Mistral is one example of massive investment in Europe, right? Which I think is excellent. We are on it too. We have AI on our public cloud already, and we decided in the fall together with NVIDIA that Europe needed a sovereign answer as well. The EU is fostering this idea of 5 mega AI clouds, you could say, and that runs a formal process. We decided to invest because the need is there in the market. So first phase opened in February, right? And we have clients on board. And I think this whole movement of European options is a great one, because that, back to your question before about sovereignty levels, that gives you the same benefits as we discussed then. And we see sovereign LLMs being built and being available today. Gen AI solutions, sovereign Gen AI solutions available today. And a lot of investment going into this region to build data centers, both for private, public cloud, AI.
And where do you see you mentioned you have customers running on your sovereign AI. Can you share with us like what are the main? Are there any specific use cases that you see being, or is it kind of justifying that? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's evolving fast. What we have done is, one thing is that you can buy GPU per the hour, and some clients need that.
Yeah.
But we have you say almost a store on top, in the sense that we have partners putting their solutions on top. And that means instead of talking about GPU per hour, now you have a business use case that you can then leverage these solutions to solve. We have a client, as an example, called PhysicsX, and they come out of doing wind tunnel, testing for automotive. But they can do simulated wind tunnel testing for anyone, right? Yeah. And optimizations of things you produce for it to be more efficient, cheaper to produce, etc. So solutions like that from them, from Siemens, from SAP, etc., are now put on the platform, and that means that you can then run whatever service you need, but in a sovereign setup. So you can sort of, bring your own data and feel comfortable that it stays here, and it's not just about GPU per hour.
Very interesting. So if I am a customer that needs to simulate some wind tunnel results, then I can buy that service in a sovereign way in your cloud and run it there.
Yeah. So we see a lot about the digital twins, also on digital twins on steroids, so a multiverse, kind of, full factories, etc., running SAP BTP. So you would say SAP AI in a sovereign setup. And some of the German universities have pulled up. There's an initiative called SOPHI, and that is to build like the European answer, if you will, to ChatGPT, but in a sovereign way.
Okay.
So significant, you would say, parameter set underneath that, and that is progressing well as well.
So what's next for? I mean, it could be for sovereign AI, but what do you see being the next step or the next challenge being overcome there?
So I think that there are 2-3 challenges. One is, of course, for us as a company, we want to bring more solutions like that from partners onto the platform. Yeah. Because that's where you move from buying sort of infrastructure to buying how can we help you with a business outcome. And I think that's a general theme with AI. We all know it's cool, but how do we move beyond the cool to something that makes a difference for society and for our customers? So that's one. And then, of course, that the market continues to move in a more European direction, in the sense that when public sector or private sector need to buy new, that they think about not only buying what they used to buy. And this is not a cry for please come buy some of ours. No. It might sound like that, but I think if we really want maybe a better balance now between buying European versus buying what we used to buy, then the time is now, to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
And if maybe kind of getting closer to wrapping it up, before we get to a couple of quick fire questions, would like to ask then if we have a CIO or CTO listening and they're maybe starting to think about this more seriously, what would you say is the next thing that they should do?
If they're thinking more about European alternatives, or what do you mean? I mean, the obvious answer is come talk to us, of course, right? Or at least spend a bit of time looking out there. What are some of the players out there, and invite them in for a conversation. Yeah. I would promise. I'll promise anyone that invites in some of the bigger names from Europe that they will be positively surprised about the maturity of the platforms.
Okay. And is there? Thank you for the advice. Is there one thing that comes to mind that they should stop doing or not do? It's probably a bit of a harder question. But,
yeah. What should you stop doing? I don't know if there's something in particular they should stop doing. I mean, I understand the complexity of, even evaluating and potentially inviting somebody new in, that drives in terms of requirements on what people are trained on and all that. But I think you have to sort of educate yourself about the possibilities out there, and then with the themes we talked about before about risk and commercials, etc., find out what is the right answer and then what way to go. So I don't know if that's anything about stop doing, but maybe lifting the gauge and think European also, not instead of, but also that you are more inclusive in how you look at the option space for you.
Yeah. And I feel like also at least stop ignoring it as well. I mean, if they have,
well put.
I was also thinking about that. Like at least they shouldn't just cover their eyes or continue as if it's such a small risk that it's not worth considering. Right? It feels like it's getting to a point where you need to start considering things if you haven't done so yet. Right?
I would say if I was in a meeting a while ago, a month or two ago, where a CIO stood up in front of a group and said, well, there aren't really any European relevant alternatives to the American hyperscalers out there. And I was like, why have we not talked to each other? And, we think we've talked to a lot, but so I think stop thinking that there aren't, because there is.
So in your experience, if someone says that there aren't, is not because they have done a thorough evaluation and seen that they're not, but more that they haven't and they're ignorant about the possibilities. Is that?
I hope so. Yeah. For us, the journey has been in 25 was a little bit. Europe was saying, Houston, we have a problem. To there aren't any relevant alternatives, to a phase where everybody is shouting from the rooftops, we have European cloud. And that's, of course, if you're, a CIO, whatever, confusing, because you have to invest a bit of time in understanding, looking under the hood, who actually has a cloud and who has something else, and then finding out what do you want to use out of those different options. And I see a lot of companies and public sector being in that space right now.
You mentioned, also maybe would like to ask that you mentioned that, of course, we talked about the sovereign AI and the release in February with I think we didn't mention, but it was 10,000 GPUs that you also brought in as a starting point. Is there any other milestones or big, maybe call it a jump, that you've seen with T-Systems in the last year? Is there any other thing, could be an investment or some other capability that you've brought in that you're proud of or that you see making a big change?
So I would say that is, I mean, that was €1 billion investment for phase one. The EU's ambition is to have 5 of these AI gigafactories with roughly 100,000 chips. For us, we take it step by step. There's a question of market demand and catering for that, of course. So that's a massive investment. We're significantly investing more now in our European public cloud because the demand is there at a different speed than it was before. So that's positive. So expanding where we have those. And then we're also making, you could say, investments into more of a capital investment into different companies, into Gen AI, etc. And then, of course, we're embracing it violently ourselves. So one area we have invested in is you say Gen AI Scrum Teams, if you want to call it that, to help with our own application modernization journey. And the beauty of being part of a telco is telcos think in products. That means we don't just apply it to do a project and then we put it away. We say, how can we productify this so that we can actually also offer it in the market to our clients?
And you said AI Scrum Team. So does that mean that you have a Scrum team only with AI agents running, or what is can you explain the concept of an AI Scrum team?
So AI agents that have, like in a Scrum team, you have different roles, right? So anything from a product owner, of course, it's people and agents together. It's not either or. But where you as a human to your product owner talk about or write about what is the desired outcome, what is the problem you're trying to solve. And then you have your agent, which can be different agents depending on if you're shaping what you want to build, if you're the developer, if you're the tester, if you're the QA, different roles, and then you can let that run until you have something where when you then look at it with a human eye, saying, well, okay, that looks quite okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And to wrap up, I would like to just ask a couple of quick fire questions, and one of them would be if you have any kind of thought leader or resource that you would kind of suggest that people hook into or listen to or read within this area.
So I would say my former colleagues, sorry for pointing to a competitive podcast, but my former colleagues at Capgemini have a podcast called Cloud Realities. They come around a lot of different topics that I think are interesting and valuable.
Very cool. Is it the one based in Denmark, or is it
it's a global podcast?
It's a global one.
Yes,
Cloud Realities. Cool.
Yeah. And off this topic, but we all work in global or international organizations, and I would say a book to read or somebody to follow is Erin Meyer from INSEAD. I think you may recall.
Culture Map.
Yeah, Culture Map, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so easy to forget. But if you're looking for the book to read during your summer holidays, that's definitely one I recommend.
It's funny. I just suggested and lent the book to one of the colleagues just a month ago. So it's very nice to see that reference. It's both her culture map, but also the one that she co-wrote on Netflix, right? The No Rules rules.
Yeah,
it's both
that is
super
brilliant
interesting
too.
as well.
Yes,
yeah. Very good. Thank you for sharing. Final question. To you, scalability is?
For me, scalability is to be chosen where it makes sense for you as a business.
Very good.
But I think we can fall in love with different concepts, right? But it's about using it for the right purpose, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. And that's it for this episode of the Smooth Scaling Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing and perhaps share it with a friend or colleague. If you want to share any thoughts or comments with us, send them to smoothscaling@qit.com. This podcast is researched by Joseph Thwaites, produced by Perseo Mandilo, and brought to you by Qit, your virtual waiting room partner. I'm your host, Jose Quaresma. Until next time, keep it smooth, keep it scalable.